Welcome to Dark Night Tales. In the shadows of the 1800s, one enslaved mother faced a horror beyond imagination. Her children sold like property to erase a 1,000 debt. What followed was not silence, not surrender, but an act so daring it shattered every rule of a brutal system. This is not a legend. This story is built from painful truths, court records, and forgotten accounts that history tried to bury. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if you value deeply researched, true historical stories that take countless hours to uncover. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. By the mid-1800s, many southern plantations were drowning in debt, despite their outward image of wealth and power. Falling crop prices, failed harvests, gambling, alcohol abuse, and reckless spending forced enslavers to seek fast cash. Enslaved people were not seen as human beings, but as movable assets, listed in account books alongside livestock and land. When money was short, the quickest solution was to sell people, often children, because they were easier to sell and fetched predictable prices. In this case, the master owed by thousands thousand, a crushing sum at the time, enough to threaten his land, reputation, and standing among other plantation owners. Rather than sell property or admit failure, he chose the most ruthless option, breaking an enslaved family apart. Mothers had no legal right to their children, and the law fully protected the sale. The plantation became a place of silent panic, where enslaved families whispered rumors of auctions and chains, knowing that debt did not just destroy businesses, it destroyed bloodlines. For the enslaved mother, the debt was not numbers on paper. It was a death sentence for her family. She understood what that sale meant: permanent separation, unknown masters, and a lifetime of suffering for her children. That moment, when plantation debt collided with a mother's love, became the spark that would drive her to attempt what no one believed was possible. The 1,000 debt was formal, documented, and coldly calculated, recorded in ledgers with neat handwriting that stripped human lives down to numbers. In the 1800s, this amount could equal several years of wages for a free laborer. But for an enslaver, it was an urgent liability that demanded immediate resolution. Creditors did not ask how the money was raised, only that it was paid. And the law allowed enslaved people to be sold swiftly, legally, and without consent. An auction was arranged with little notice. Traders arrived with scales, measuring sticks, and contracts, inspecting the children as if examining livestock. Ages, health, and physical strength were assessed, while the mother was forced to stand aside, present but powerless. Each child was assigned a monetary value, their combined price carefully calculated to clear the exact debt owed. The transaction was efficient, brutal, and final. When the sale was complete, the ledger showed the debt erased. Clean lines, balanced numbers. But what the paper did not record were the screams, the pleading, or the collapse of a mother watching her children transferred to strangers. With the stroke of a pen, the master's financial burden disappeared. In its place was a wound so deep it would drive the enslaved mother toward a decision that could cost her life, but might be the only way to save her children from a fate worse than death. The auction took place in broad daylight, often in a town square or courthouse yard, where cruelty hid behind routine. Buyers gathered casually, some chatting, others calculating, while enslaved children were lined up on raised platforms. Their small hands were examined, mouths forced open to check teeth, bodies turned and prodded to assess strength and future labor potential. Fear filled the air, though no one in power acknowledged it. The children did not fully understand money or debt, only that strangers were staring at them, and that their mother's cries were being ignored. Some clung to her skirt until they were violently pulled away. Others were warned not to speak or look up. Each bid pushed the family further apart, the numbers climbing while hope vanished. When the final hammer fell, the children were marked, documented, and reassigned, no longer part of the same family, no longer even belonging to the same plantation. For the mother, the auction was a living nightmare she could not escape. She was forced to watch as her children were claimed by different buyers, sometimes sent in opposite directions, ensuring permanent separation. That moment, when chains replaced embraces and names were replaced by prices, burned itself into her memory. It was here, amid the noise of bidding and the silence of the law, that despair hardened into resolve. If the system would not recognize her humanity, she would defy it, no matter the cost. Before the buyers led the children away, the mother was allowed only a brief, controlled moment, what enslavers cruelly called a farewell. Surrounded by guards and traders, she knelt to her children, pressing her face against theirs, trying to memorize every detail, the sound of their breathing, the warmth of their skin, the way their hands trembled in hers. She whispered their names again and again, knowing it might be the last time they would hear them spoken with love. She did not cry loudly at first. She knew any sign of resistance could bring punishment or immediate removal. Instead, her grief collapsed inward. She told her children to remember who they were, to hold on to each other if they could, and to never forget that they were loved. Words that carried no legal weight, but were all she had left to give. The children begged not to go. Some promised to be good, believing obedience might save them. Others were too young to understand why their mother was suddenly being pushed away. When the moment ended, it ended violently. Hands tore the children from her arms. Chains clinked. Wagons creaked forward. As dust rose from the road, the mother stood frozen, watching the last glimpse of her children disappear. To everyone else, the sale was finished. To her, something inside had crossed a point of no return. That goodbye was not surrender. It was the birth of a plan, formed in silence, driven by a promise she made to herself. This would not be the end of their story. Under slavery, the law did not recognize enslaved women as mothers, only as property. Children inherited the legal status of the mother, meaning they were born enslaved and immediately owned by the enslaver, not protected by family ties. No court acknowledged a mother's right to raise, protect, or even remain with her own children. Love, care, and blood meant nothing against a bill of sale. These laws were designed to make separation easy and resistance illegal. Enslavers could sell children at any age, without warning and without explanation. A mother who protested risked whipping, confinement, or sale herself. If she ran after her children, she could be hunted, branded, or killed. The legal system stood firmly on the side of profit, enforcing contracts while deliberately ignoring human suffering. For the enslaved mother, this reality was devastating, but also clarifying. She understood that no appeal, no prayer to authority, and no act of obedience would bring her children back. The law that erased her motherhood also removed any expectation of mercy. In that cold truth, a dangerous realization formed a die. If the law would not protect her family, then breaking the law was the only path left. What followed would be an act born, not of rebellion alone, but of a mother reclaiming an identity the system had tried to erase. The auction was not a private cruelty, it was a public one. Townspeople, traders, other enslavers, and even children stood watching as the sale unfolded. Some treated it as entertainment, others as routine business, but all became witnesses to a family being destroyed. Their presence mattered, because it meant what happened could never truly be denied, even if it was later forgotten. Among the crowd were other enslaved people, forced to look on as a warning. They understood the message clearly. Obedience did not protect families, and debt could reach anyone. Some lowered their eyes in fear, while others locked glances with the mother, silently sharing her pain. A few free onlookers felt discomfort, even shame, but they did nothing. To intervene would risk social standing, business ties, or legal consequences. These witnesses carried the story forward. Whispers spread through nearby plantations, kitchens, and fields. Details changed with retelling, but the core truth remained. A mother had her children sold in front of an entire community. This collective knowledge created something dangerous for the enslavers: memory. And memory meant that when the mother later acted, people would remember why. Her defiance would not come from nowhere. It would be rooted in a public injustice too visible to fully erase. In the days that followed the sale, the plantation returned to its routines, but the mother did not. Outwardly, she worked as ordered, spoke when spoken to, and showed no open rebellion. Inwardly, she was calculating every sound, every path, every weakness in the system that had taken her children. Enslaved people were expected to break under grief. What no one anticipated was focus. Her decision formed quietly, because any spoken word could mean death. Running away, pursuing sold children, or interfering with legal property transfers were crimes punishable by torture or execution. Women, especially mothers, were considered incapable of such planning, an assumption she used to her advantage. The enslavers mistook her silence for acceptance. What she chose was forbidden not only by law, but by fear. She decided she would try to reclaim her children through escape, pursuit, deception, or sacrifice. She knew the odds were nearly impossible. Slave patrols, dogs, armed men, and informants stood between her and success. Failure meant whipping, sail to the deep south, or death. Yet this decision was not reckless. It was measured, fueled by the knowledge that doing nothing guaranteed permanent loss. In a system designed to strip choice away, choosing action itself became an act of resistance. That moment, when a mother chose danger over despair, marked the true beginning of her impossible journey. No enslaved person survived or resisted alone. Quietly, the mother began to receive help, not through grand promises, but through small, dangerous acts of solidarity. Other enslaved workers shared whispered information, which roads traders used when patrols changed shifts, which overseers drank too much to notice details. Every fragment of knowledge was a risk to pass along and a risk to receive. Among them were women who had lost children themselves. They understood her pain without explanation. One offered scraps of food hidden in cloth. Another passed along a worn map sketched from memory. Someone else delayed a task on purpose, creating moments of cover. These acts were invisible to the enslavers, but punishable by brutal consequences if discovered. There may have also been help from the edges of the free world. A free black laborer, a sympathetic boatman, or a poor white neighbor willing to look away for a price or out of conscience. Such alliances were fragile and unspoken. Names were rarely exchanged. Trust was survival. These secret allies did not see themselves as heroes. They saw themselves as parents, siblings, and human beings refusing to let the system completely erase compassion. Without them, the mother's plan would have collapsed before it began. With them, the impossible shifted, still deadly, still uncertain, but no longer entirely alone. Every step the mother took carried the threat of violence. Enslaved people who attempted escape or interfered with sales were made examples of, whipped publicly, shackled, branded, or sold farther south to labor camps known for near certain death. Women were not spared. In fact, punishment was often harsher, meant to crush both body and spirit. Slave patrols roamed roads and rivers, armed and authorized to kill. Dogs were trained to track scent for miles. Notices describing runaways were posted with rewards, turning ordinary citizens into hunters. Even those who helped her, if discovered, could be beaten, jailed, or killed. The risk extended far beyond the mother alone. She understood this fully. Each night she lay awake, knowing that one mistake could mean never seeing her children again, or ensuring they would never see her alive. Fear was constant, but it no longer controlled her. Grief had already taken everything the system could steal. What made her resolve extraordinary was not that she ignored danger, but that she weighed it and moved forward anyway. In a world built on terror, choosing action was a direct challenge to power. And once that challenge began, there was no turning back. The plan was not written, not spoken aloud, and never shared in full with anyone. It lived entirely in the mother's mind, shaped by fragments of information, gathered in whispers and observation. She studied the routines of the plantation, when wagons departed, when guards changed, when dogs were fed, when darkness truly settled in. What others saw as monotony, she saw as opportunity. Her goal was not simply to run, but to follow the trail of the sale. Traders left patterns, routes toward rivers, market towns, and transfer depots where enslaved people were temporarily held before being moved again. If she moved fast enough, quietly enough, she might reach at least one of her children before they vanished deeper into the system. She prepared with almost nothing. Extra food meant suspicion. Shoes slowed movement. Possessions could be traced. She carried only what could not be taken from her: memory, determination, and the knowledge that hesitation would doom her. Timing mattered more than strength. One wrong night, one wrong road, and patrols would close in. What made the plan impossible was not just the danger, but the logic of slavery itself. Enslaved mothers were not expected to pursue sold children. The system relied on despair and resignation. Her plan broke that assumption. It was a gamble against distance, law, and armed men, but it was the only path left where hope still existed. The turning point came without ceremony, in the quiet space between night and dawn. The plantation slept, believing control was absolute. That was when the mother moved. No announcement, no final look back, only a single step taken in silence, followed by another. With that step, she crossed an invisible line that few ever returned from. Behind her lay forced labor, surveillance, and certain separation. Ahead lay uncertainty, pain, and the real possibility of death. Yet something shifted inside her as she left. Fear did not vanish, but it transformed. For the first time since her children were sold, she was acting instead of enduring. Every sound felt amplified: insects in the grass, distant hooves, the wind through trees. She avoided open roads, followed shadows, and trusted the fragments of guidance given by her allies. Time stretched strangely. Minutes felt like hours, and each safe step felt unreal. The world she had known all her life was falling away with every breath. This was the moment everything changed. Not because success was guaranteed, but because surrender was no longer possible. Whether she reached her children or not, the system had already failed in one crucial way: it had not broken her. And once that truth became real, nothing could return to how it was before. It did not take long for the absence to be noticed. By morning, the plantation's routine was broken, and suspicion turned quickly into certainty. Word spread fast, faster than the mother could travel. Riders were dispatched, notices prepared, and slave catchers joined the hunt, drawn by reward money and a culture that normalized pursuit as sport. These men knew the terrain. They followed rivers, crossroads, and market routes, the same paths traders used. Dogs were unleashed, trained to lock onto scent even days later. Every farmhouse, ferry crossing, and roadside tavern became a potential trap. The mother had to move in ways that defied instinct, through water to mask her trail. Against common routes, sometimes standing motionless for hours as danger passed within feet of her. The pursuit was relentless, but it revealed something fragile within the system. It required constant manpower, money, and fear to maintain control. One determined woman forced dozens of armed men to respond. The very effort to capture her exposed how unstable that control truly was. With each narrow escape, the chase became more desperate and more dangerous. If caught now, punishment would be severe, meant to erase the example she was becoming. But the pursuit also meant something else. She was close enough to matter. Close enough that the impossible could still happen. Whether the mother was captured or vanished into history, her actions left scars that could not be erased. The plantation did not return to normal. Overseers tightened rules, patrols increased, and punishments grew harsher, not because order had been restored, but because fear had taken hold. One woman's defiance had exposed a truth enslavers tried to hide: control was never absolute. Among the enslaved community, her story spread quietly but powerfully. It became proof that despair was not the only response to injustice. Mothers spoke her name in whispers. Children were warned and inspired by the same tale. Even those who never saw her again understood what she had risked and why. For the enslaver, the financial debt may have been cleared, but a new cost emerged. Reputation suffered. Neighbors questioned competence. Creditors worried about instability. The system that relied on silence now faced memory and example. The plantation stood as before, fields planted, buildings intact, but something essential had shifted. Authority had been challenged not by force or weapons, but by a mother's refusal to accept erasure. And once that kind of resistance entered a place, it never fully left. The mother's name was never carved into stone, and official records reduced her to a line, if they mentioned her at all. History, written by those in power, had no space for enslaved women who defied the system unless they could be turned into warnings. So her story survived in fragments, whispered memories, altered retellings, and silence where a name should have been. Yet erasure did not mean failure. Her legacy lived in what followed. Families held on to their children tighter. Enslaved people learned roots, shared knowledge, and remembered that resistance did not always wear chains or carry weapons. It could take the form of a mother walking into the dark for love. Long after the plantation faded, the truth remained embedded in collective memory. Modern historians still struggle to reconstruct lives like hers because the system worked hard to destroy evidence. But absence itself tells a story. It reveals how dangerous her courage was to those who benefited from forgetting. What she did defied odds, law, and terror, even without a recorded ending. Her legacy endures as a reminder that in the most brutal conditions, humanity did not disappear. It fought to survive.